All right, everyone, my clock shows 5:30, so we'll jump into this. Welcome, everyone. You are here for the Inspired by Nature Biomimicry. And my name is Jess Wolf, and I am the Urban Wildlife Coordinator for the Nevada Department of Wildlife. And with me tonight, we have Nick Anise with Envirolution. Nick, did you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, my name is Nick Anisi. I'm the 2020-2021 Education Outreach Coordinator for Envirolution.
Perfect, thanks so much. And tonight moderating, we have Jessica Castle, and she's one of our amazing conservation educators with the Nevada Department of Wildlife. So this is a Department of Wildlife / Envirolution conservation education program, so please keep everything age appropriate. This is PG rated, so just keep that in mind. We cannot see you or hear you, so if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. If you scroll down with your mouse towards the bottom of your screen, or sometimes it's at the top of your screen, there should be a little box that says Q&A. You can throw any questions in there that you'd like, and Jess will answer those, or we'll answer them at the end. And then there's going to be a poll and an opportunity to chat during the webinar as well, but we'll let you know when those happen. So with that, let's just jump right into it. So first, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what is mimicry. So mimicry is the resemblance of one organism to another organism or object. And it can be between different organisms or organisms that are in the same species. So I'm sure a lot of us have heard this adage, red touch yellow, kill a fellow. And that is kind of a little rhyme for the eastern coral snake and the scarlet king snake. So the eastern coral snake is right over here. And it is a venomous species of snake, whereas the scarlet king snake is a non-venomous snake. So the scarlet king snake kind of mimics the coloration of the eastern coral and gets a little bit of added protection because most predators don't want to mess with something that is venomous. So there are many different types of mimicry out there in the world, but we're just going to go over 4 of them. So the first one I wanted to talk about is malarian. So this is when an inedible or noxious organism look like each other. So here's an example. It happens a lot in insects and particularly butterflies. All these butterflies, like these 2 look pretty similar, these 2 look pretty similar, and so on and so forth. But all of them are noxious or inedible in some way. And so that gives them added protection because the predator is going to see one of them and think to itself, oh, that tasted really bad when I tried last time. I'm not going to try it. And it goes for both of the species. There's also Batesian mimicry, which is when a defenseless organism looks or acts like a harmful organism. So there are poison dart frogs, which are very poisonous, right? There's also a mimic poison dart frog. And the mimic poison dart frog looks a lot like the poison dart frog, but they're getting a lot of their protection from predators because they look so similar to that really noxious poison dart frog. Another type of mimicry is aggressive mimicry, and this is when a predator or a parasite resemble their prey or their host. So this bird right here is a cuckoo, and they are a parasitic type of bird because what they'll do is they'll actually lay their eggs in the nest of a host bird like a sparrow or something like that, and that host bird will actually take care of their young. They'll incubate them, take care of them, and get them to the fledging phase when they get to leave the nest. There's actually some pretty crazy pictures on the internet of a little tiny songbird feeding a big cuckoo. Then there's also automimicry, and this is when members of the same species resemble another from the same species. So this happens a lot in bees. The male bees typically in some species don't have stingers, whereas the females do. But because they look so similar to one another, the males get that added protection because they look like the females and nobody wants to get stung. So again, this isn't a complete list of mimicry. There's a ton out there. If you're interested in it, we have some resources that we can give out to you if you want. So one example that we have in Nevada of mimicry is the monarchs and the viceroys. So they look very, very similar to one another. But viceroys are actually smaller than the monarch. And if you see right here, this little line, that's a telltale sign that it is a viceroy. But they both taste really, really bad. So they're getting a bit of protection because both of them look very similar, and they also have that kind of inedible taste when a predator tries to eat them. So there's going to be a poll that pops up. This is our one and only poll. So what type of mimicry do you think that the monarchs and the viceroys show off? Perfect. Let's end that poll. So it looks like we got a bunch of different answers. The correct answer is the Malarian mimicry because they are different species. There's the viceroy and there's the monarch. They are both butterflies, but different species of butterflies. And they both are inedible, but they look very similar. So they're getting that protection because they're inedible and they look like another animal that is inedible. It's a hard word to say. Next up, we have the Steller's jay and red-tailed hawks. So this is a Steller's jay. It is a bird that is in the corvid family. So it's in the same family as crows and ravens. And corvids, they're known for being super, super, super smart. Steller's jays are a social species of bird, and they'll travel and kind of hang out together. And when they're feeling threatened, they'll actually mob an intruder. So oftentimes you'll see maybe a hawk or something sitting up in a tree, and you'll see all these birds kind of dive bombing it and mobbing it and trying to get it to go away. Steller's jays are a species that will do that. But sometimes they're unsuccessful. Sometimes Mr. Hawk or Mr. Predator or human, whoever is in the area, they don't take the mobbing and they just kind of walk away or stay in the area and they're not getting the message. So if they're unsuccessful, a Steller's jay can actually mimic the call of a bald eagle or a red-tailed hawk. So they're trying to mimic that larger predator to get whatever is in the area to go away. Next up, we have the gopher snake and the rattlesnake. So both of them are native to Nevada. And we actually have 6 different species of rattlesnakes. But up here in northern Nevada, we only have the Great Basin rattlesnake. So rattlesnakes are venomous, whereas gopher snakes are non-venomous. So rattlesnakes, they get their food by injecting the prey item with venom, whereas a gopher snake, they are a constrictor. So they're gonna grab onto whatever they're trying to eat and squeeze really hard, and that's how they're gonna get their food. But gopher snakes, they mimic rattlesnakes. Because again, does anyone want to get bit by a rattlesnake? I know I certainly don't want to, and lots of predators don't either. So with their tail, a gopher snake has a really thin, skinny tail, whereas the rattlesnake, they have their tail that has the buttons at the end. So when a gopher snake is feeling threatened, if they're next to some brush or maybe some leaves, they'll actually wag their tail in the brush to try and mimic the sound of a rattle, to try and get whatever it is they're feeling threatened by to go away. Their scale and their patterns also look very similar to a rattlesnake's, especially if you're up in the sky, you're a red-tailed hawk looking for a delicious meal. If you were to see this gopher snake's pattern and coloration, you might think, uh-oh, that is not a gopher snake, that is a rattlesnake. I need to stay away. So their kind of camouflage looks a lot like that of the rattlesnake. And then another way that they kind of mimic a rattlesnake is they'll actually flatten out their head to look like a triangle. A rattlesnake has a head that looks like a triangle because it has to have a place to keep those venom glands, so they kind of puff out at the sides. Whereas a gopher snake, they typically have this slender head. Well, if they're feeling threatened, they'll puff it out, and it looks very eerily like a rattlesnake's head. Been tricked a couple times by them. It can get kind of scary, and then you have to look at the tail, and you're like, oh, not today, Mr. Gopher Snake. I know you're not gonna hurt me. Another cool one that mimics plants is the common American walking stick. There are lots of different types of walking sticks. They're found on all continents except for Antarctica, and they're actually herbivores. So they're eating lots of leaves and trees and leaves of trees and shrubs. And they mimic plants and sticks, and this is super great camouflage for them. But some species, they also have secondary defenses like spines or startle displays, or even toxic secretions. But the common American walking stick, they just have that really good camouflage. And finally, we have our mule deer fawns and really their habitat. So when mule deer fawns are born, they only weigh about 5.5 to 6 pounds. So they're really itty bitty and super, super light. And during the day, they're often left alone by their mothers. We call female mule deer does. And they leave them alone because a baby fawn like that, they just can't keep up with foraging around for food. And they really don't need to because they're drinking their mother's milk for nutrition. So they're born both scentless and spotted. So those spots that are on their back, they're not there for no reason. They actually mimic the light and the shadows that come through trees. So a predator will kind of miss them when they're looking out trying to find food. Mule deer fawns are actually weaned from their mothers at about 60 to 75 days old. And that's when they'll kind of start to lose those spots and kind of lose that camouflage and turn into the gray tan color that our mule deer are. So that's a bunch of mimicry, but what is biomimicry? So biomimicry is the imitation of natural biological designs or processes in engineering or invention. And this term was first used in 1982, so it's a relatively new idea. But we've been doing biomimicry for a really long time. So here's just a few examples of how humans have kind of mimicked nature. So this is a Japanese bullet train, and the front of it has actually been designed off of the kingfisher beaks. So before the design was changed, they were more rounded, and the trains were super, super noisy, and they could be heard from about a quarter mile away. But one of the designers, I believe he was a pretty avid bird watcher, he was observing a kingfisher kind of dive into water, and he noticed how the water displaced and allowed the bird to dive down and get fish. So he changed the design of the bullet train, and by changing the design, the new design produced 30% less air pressure, used 15% less electricity, and it was about 10% faster. So just by changing the nose of that bullet train and mimicking the beak of a kingfisher, we got so many different benefits from it. There's also Velcro. Velcro was inspired by burrs. I'm sure lots of us have been out on a hiking trail and had burrs kind of stuck to us. Well, if you look really closely, burrs have these little hooked teeth, and that's kind of what gets them to grasp onto you. The inventor of Velcro mimicked that idea. You can see this little hook right here that hooks onto the nice fluffy part of the Velcro. Looks a lot like that of the burr. The first flying machine made by the Wright brothers was inspired by the flight of pigeons. And then we also mimic beavers' uncanny abilities to create dams. And we've actually found if we take a lesson out of the beaver rule book when it comes to dam making, the way that they build their dams is super efficient compared to sometimes the way that we build them. So those are just a few examples, but Nick is gonna jump on here and he's gonna give some of examples, other examples and how it relates to sustainability.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, so biomimicry has really helped humans a lot. So how specifically has it helped humans, and how can biomimicry help with sustainability? Before we answer that question, I want to ask you guys a question, and I want to hear what you guys have to think, what you hear when you hear the word sustainability. So if you want to type in chat, just think of just a short sentence or a few words that you think of when you hear the word sustainability. Okay, I see lasting, so that makes sense, yeah. Yeah, lasting in an efficient manner. That's another good one. Take a couple more. Responsible. That's interesting. That's good. Yeah. Yeah, one more word or sentence. Continuation. Yeah, that's another good one. You can keep posting what you think of as when you think sustainability in the chat. But basically, the general short answer for sustainability is the capacity to endure or continue. So, like some of you guys have said, some creating something that lasts means that it's sustainable. And then there's more of an environmental definition, which is capable of being maintained at a steady level without exhausting natural resources or causing severe ecological damage. So if something is truly sustainable, that means it's not harming the environment, and it's not harming not just the environment, but also uh, like human lives and like social and the social and economic part of the environment, and yeah, and society. So this was a nice little quote that I found when doing research. And it says, when we look at what is truly sustainable, the only real model that we have that has worked over long periods of time is a natural world. This quote was said by Janine Benyus. She is a natural sciences writer and conservationist that has done quite a few TED Talks on biomimicry, and she's really good at educating people about the amazing features that animals have that have inspired some amazing creations that humans have created. So now we need to look into what sustainability encompasses. So over at Envirolution, where I work, we find that there's still this idea in society that a lot of people think that we have to choose between the three main sustainability priorities or pillars: people, profits, and the planet. And the reason I say pillars is that some of you may know these as the three pillars of sustainability, which is social equality, economic viability, and environmental protection. So people think that we can't have a thriving economy without good jobs, or with good jobs, affluent lifestyles, and the ability to protect the environment all at the same time. But our vision at Envirolution is to live in a world where all these three pillars live in balance so that we can truly have a sustainable world. And we encourage people to have the same mindset so that future generations can start building for a more sustainable future. So there's a couple of, or actually there's a lot of really cool examples of biomimicry in architecture, not just in the animal world. So, like Jess said, biomimicry isn't a new thing. It's something that we've been looking at for a while, but it's also something that we have to continue to look at to the future, so we can continue to build these amazing structures and buildings and devices. So, architects have looked towards biomimicry to design buildings and structures that will last for years. And some of these actually operate off of renewable energy. So a couple of quick examples I want to go over really quickly is the Beijing Stadium, which is inspired by an upturned bird's nest. So if you guys have ever looked at a bird's nest, or if you've seen one in the trees, it needs to be able to allow a good amount of airflow to go to the nest and allow the babies to breathe, but it also needs to optimize the amount of sunlight that hits the nest so that the babies are warm, but they don't overcook or anything like that. So that's exactly what this stadium does. It has these panels that optimize sunlight that enter the structure, and they also provide insulation. The other one that many people might not think of when thinking about biomimicry is the Eiffel Tower. And the structure's base is actually based on the femur bone or the thigh bone, which is a very strong bone. And it's built to withstand shear winds and provide proper structural stability. So this is a pretty big example, and it's my personal favorite example of biomimicry in architecture after looking at all these different examples. This is called the Eastgate Center and it's in Zimbabwe. It's actually the largest office and shopping complex in Zimbabwe. The architect for this building is Mick Pierce, and it opened in 1996, and it's the first building in the world to use natural cooling, which is really cool. And some of you might think, what inspired this building? Well, actually, it was inspired by termite mounds. So just looking at a termite mound from the outside, you look and think that it's just like a solid structure, but it actually has a lot of small holes within the mound that allow air to pass through it freely. So similar to a lung, the structure is able to inhale and exhale air as temperatures rise and fall throughout the day and night. So the building is made of concrete and bricks, which have a high thermal mass. What that means is that it can absorb a lot of heat without really changing temperature. And it also has an exterior that is similar to a cactus. It's kind of prickly, and that increases the surface area of the building. And by increasing the amount of surface area, heat loss is improved at night, while heat gain is actually reduced during the day. The building has some power fans inside of it, which pulls in cool air from outside and disperses it throughout the 7 floors of the building. And the concrete blocks absorb the cool air, and in the morning, the warm air is actually vented through the chimneys. And so this allows the building to stay at a comfortable 82 degrees during the day and 57 degrees at night. This is another pretty cool example that I just actually found out about recently, thanks to Jess. So this is an Earthship, and what it is, it's basically a passive solar house that is made of natural and upcycled materials. And it was actually pioneered by a guy named Michael Reynolds, is the name of this architect. And when I first looked these up, I thought these were only found in like New Mexico, where they, I think, were founded. But actually, they've been built across the world in places like Europe, Mexico, and South America, and other places, obviously. So what's really cool about these houses is that they address the 6 principles of sustainable human needs. It has some internal food production capability. You can get all of your electricity from the sun and the wind. It maintains comfortable temperatures in the building all year long, which reduces heating and cooling bills, which is really cool. It collects water from rain or from the sky that's used for everything from bathing to showering to washing and even drinking. It also contains a lot of your sewage in a healthy way. And then, like I said earlier, it reduces and eliminates a lot of utility bills from normal housing. This isn't necessarily a building, it's more of a structure, but I thought this was a really cool example as well. This is called a wind tree, and it was started up in France by a company called Newind, and the architect who thought of this design, his name was Jerome Michaud Lariviere, and he thought of it in 2011, and this device has some cool arrow leaves, is what they're called, and they're actually small vertical axis wind turbines. So what Jerome wanted to accomplish with this tree was he wanted to create an alternative to nuclear power. The tree is 32 feet high, or 10 meters high, and then it's 8 meters wide. The trunk and branches are made of steel, and the leaves are actually made of plastic. And each leaf is driven by the wind and produces electricity by turning on its axis. So It sounds very similar to a wind turbine, but the main difference between this and a wind turbine is that this was a much quieter way of generating wind energy. So I thought this was really cool. Each leaf has a generator inside of it, and the electricity is produced and conducted from branch to branch and eventually moves down to the bottom of the tree. And then an inverter distributes the current and the desired frequency and voltage. So one of these trees is actually has enough power or can produce enough power to produce 50 to 60% of the energy needs for a family of 4, which is actually really cool. It can generate 3.1 kilowatts of energy, and they're built to last a long time. They can withstand rain and snow in moderate amounts, and they were made to build and last 25 years or more. So in conclusion, biomimicry is an awesome thing. It's so cool to see how animals have these amazing features that have helped us with the technology that we have today. And again, biomimicry has actually been around for a while, and we have to continue to look towards the natural world and explore it to create more sustainable inventions and buildings and stuff like that. It's helped us with sustainable design and architecture, and it'll allow us to create even more devices that will last longer, and hopefully it'll lead us to a much more better and sustainable future. So thank you, nature.
Awesome, thank you, Nick. I definitely learned a lot from your talk. I love Earthships. I think they're the coolest thing. There are so many examples, and there's like a whole Earthship community down in Taos, New Mexico, and I totally want to go down there. They actually can teach you how to build one yourself, which I think is totally amazing. If you want to learn more about biomimicry, there are a ton of great resources. Here are just a few. So there's biomimicry.org, biomimicry.net, and then the Smithsonian article has a really amazing, it's just a really good article if you want to learn more about biomimicry. So with that, we can take some questions. I have our contact information down here. If you think of something tonight, when you're dreaming and you think of an amazing biomimicry invention, shoot it over to us. I definitely want to hear all about them, or if anything else pops up. But with that, Jess, do we have any questions?
It does not look like we have any unanswered questions at the moment. I did go ahead and put those links in the chat for anyone that wants to refer back to those later. So we'll give you just a moment. If anybody has any questions, they can go ahead and put them in the Q&A box, and we would be happy to answer those. Otherwise, Jess and Nick's information is on the screen if you, like Jess said, think of it in the middle of the night.
That's when all my good ideas happen.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jess. Well, I don't see any unanswered questions, so I think we're all set.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Really appreciate you coming and joining in with the fun. While we're hanging out, I know the next few days are definitely not going to be the best time to go outside, depending on your perspective. But make sure to take a break and embrace the outdoors responsibly. So thank you everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your night.